On January 1st, 1909, the city of Paris issued a demolition order for the most famous structure on Earth. Not a proposal, not a debate. An order, signed, official, irreversible, unless someone intervened. The Eiffel Tower had 20 days to live. Most people assume the tower was beloved from the moment it rose above the rooftops of Paris. They have been told that story their entire lives. They grew up with the image, the iron-lace silhouette against a golden sky, the city laid out below it like a gift. They believe the tower was always celebrated, always adored, always permanent. They are wrong. What actually happened was a 20-year war between one man's obsession and an entire civilization's fury, and the tower nearly lost. The story most people know is the postcard. This is the story underneath it, the one they leave out. The one that explains why the most beautiful monument on Earth almost ceased to exist before anyone had time to fall in love with it. It starts not with triumph, it starts with rage. The year is 1886. France is preparing for the Universal Exposition of 1889, a world's fair meant to celebrate 100 years since the French Revolution. The mood in Paris is ambitious. The mood is competitive. Britain has its empire, Germany has its industry. France wants to show the world something that neither of them has, something unprecedented, something that announces, without any possibility of misunderstanding, that Paris is still the center of civilization. The government announces a competition. They want a temporary centerpiece monument, something monumental enough to define the exposition, something that will draw visitors from every nation on Earth, something that, when it is eventually demolished, as it will be, as it must be, will leave a memory powerful enough to last for generations. Temporary. That word is in the brief. That word is non-negotiable. Or so everyone thinks. Over 107 proposals pour in. Most are forgotten within weeks. Some are genuinely strange. A giant guillotine in iron, a monument to the revolution through its most infamous instrument, a sun tower of stone, a mechanical lighthouse. One competitor proposes a tower of granite. Another suggests a massive iron sphere. And then there is Eiffel. Gustave Eiffel submits a design for an iron tower 300 meters tall. Nothing like it has ever been built. Nothing like it has ever been seriously proposed at full scale. Engineers across Europe read the submission and call it structurally reckless, not ambitious. Reckless. There is a difference. And in 1886, most of the engineering establishment believes they know exactly which side of that line Eiffel is standing on. The artists call it worse. Within weeks of the design going public, 300 of France's most celebrated intellectuals sign a formal petition against it. This is not a casual objection. This is a coordinated campaign by the cultural guardians of an entire civilization. They call Eiffel's tower a gigantic black factory chimney. They call it a blot on the soul of France. The composer Charles Gounod signs it. The writer Guy de Maupassant signs it. The architect Charles Garnier, the man who designed the Paris Opera House, one of the most celebrated buildings of the century, signs it. Architects, painters, sculptors, poets, novelists, the full constellation of French cultural achievement, aligned against one iron tower. They describe it as a hollow candlestick, a metal carcass, a disgrace to Paris visible from every corner of the city, a city they call, without irony, the most beautiful on Earth. They write that future generations will look back on this moment as the day Paris surrendered its dignity to an engineer's vanity. And here is the part that gets left out of every tourist brochure. They were not being melodramatic. By the standards of 1886, they had a genuine and reasonable point. Iron construction was the language of utility. It meant train stations, factories, warehouses, railway bridges over muddy rivers in industrial English cities where no one went for beauty. The great buildings of Paris, Notre Dame, the Louvre, Versailles, the Opera, were stone. They were carved. They were ornamented. They announced permanence and civilization through materials that had built cathedrals for 1,000 years. To place a raw iron lattice tower in the heart of that city was not simply aesthetic disagreement. It was, in the minds of people who had devoted their lives to the idea of Paris as the summit of human culture, a kind of desecration. But Gustave Eiffel did not back down. He never backed down. It was not in his nature, and it was not in his history. Eiffel was 54 years old in 1886, and he had already built some of the most technically demanding iron structures in the world. Railway viaducts across the valleys of southern France. Structures so elegant and so precise that engineers came from across Europe just to look at them. A railway bridge in Portugal over the Douro River that was, at the time of its construction, the highest bridge in the world. And most famously, the internal iron skeleton of the Statue of Liberty. The hidden engineering that allows a 151-foot copper woman to stand upright in the winds of New York Harbor without tearing herself apart. He understood iron the way a poet understands language, not as a material to be tamed, but as a medium to be expressed. He understood wind loading, stress distribution, thermal expansion, the behavior of metal under forces most engineers only theorized about in comfortable offices. He had spent 30 years learning what iron could do, and he was absolutely certain it could do this. He also understood money and politics. He lobbied hard. He cultivated relationships inside the government, and he negotiated a deal that was unusual enough to raise eyebrows. The French government would fund 1.5 million francs of the estimated 7.5 million franc total cost. Eiffel would personally finance the remaining 6 million, in exchange for exclusive rights to all commercial operations during the exposition and for the following 20 years. 6 million francs. His own money, his own fortune, his own reputation. He was not merely betting on an engineering idea. He was betting everything he had built in a 30-year career on a tower that 300 of France's greatest cultural minds had publicly declared a catastrophe. Construction begins on January 28, 1887. 250 workers start on the foundations. The journalists are already there, watching, taking notes, waiting for the first disaster to write about. The petition signers have made their opposition known. Now comes the moment where theory meets ground, literally, and the ground fights back immediately. The Champs de Mars is not solid earth. The soil is soft, layered, inconsistent. On the side closest to the Seine, engineers sink test bores and discover something that changes everything. The water table sits just 5 meters below the surface. 5 meters. In a city built on river sediment, 5 meters below ground is essentially the bottom of the river itself, just slightly delayed. To build foundations that can bear the weight of a 10,000-ton iron tower on ground this saturated, Eiffel's engineers have to go below the water table. Compressed air caissons are deployed, sealed chambers pumped full of pressurized air that pushes the groundwater back and creates a temporary dry working space underground. Workers climb down into these chambers, below the waterline of the Seine, and dig by hand in pressurized air that makes their ears ring and their joints ache. Caisson disease, what later becomes known as decompression sickness or the bends, is not yet well understood. Workers who descend too quickly or ascend too fast suffer agonizing joint pain. Some cannot walk after their shifts. The connection between the pressure change and the physiological damage will not be clearly established for another decade. In 1887, workers simply suffer and do not know why. Meanwhile, the legal attacks continue above ground. Residents near the site file injunctions. Lawyers argue before judges. One particularly determined opponent submits a formal engineering brief claiming the foundation design is fatally flawed and the tower will collapse within its first year. The city court orders Eiffel to post a surety bond against potential damage to neighboring properties. Eiffel posts the bond without comment and returns to work. The foundations take 3 months. By April of 1887, the concrete bases are set. The iron anchor bolts are in place, and the 4 massive stone piers that will anchor the 4 legs of the tower are rising from the ground like the first signs of something that refuses to be stopped. Now comes the phase that will either prove Eiffel's critics right or silence them permanently. The 4 legs of the tower must rise from their separate foundations at precisely the correct angles and meet, within millimeters, at the first platform level, 45 meters above the ground. This is not a problem that can be solved by working harder. It is a problem that can only be solved by working smarter, with technology that does not yet exist in any proven form. Eiffel solves it with hydraulic jacks. Built into the base of each leg, between the stone foundation and the iron structure above, are adjustable hydraulic jacks capable of tiny incremental movements, fractions of a millimeter at a time. As each leg rises, surveyors measure its angle constantly. If any leg drifts even slightly, the hydraulic jack at its base corrects the angle in real time. The system has never been tested at this scale. Its precision has never been demanded under these conditions. The critics watch, the newspapers report. The petition signers gather on the banks of the Seine on clear days and stare up at the four iron legs rising slowly toward each other. They are certain something will go wrong. In March of 1888, 13 months after construction began, the four legs reach the first platform level. The hydraulic corrections have worked. The angles are exact. The girders that form the first platform connect. The structure is sound. But this moment of triumph goes almost unnoticed in the press. The newspapers are already running a new campaign. The upper sections of the tower will be impossible to build safely, and when workers attempt to reach the heights required for the second and third levels, there will be deaths. Many deaths. The tower is not merely an aesthetic disaster waiting to happen, the papers claim. It is a death trap, and they have a question that Eiffel has not yet publicly answered. How do you build the top 100 meters of a 300-meter iron tower in the wind with workers who have no secure platform to stand on and no safety technology adequate to the height? The answer, it turns out, is one of the most important contributions to construction safety in modern history. Eiffel's team designs a custom rolling scaffold system that travels up the outside of the tower as each new section is completed, always providing a secure working platform directly adjacent to the active construction zone. Workers do not have to lean out into open air. They do not have to improvise. The scaffold moves with the work. Additionally, and this is remarkable for 1888, Eiffel installs canteen facilities at the working levels. Workers eat at height during their breaks rather than descending to the ground and climbing back up, which reduces the number of dangerous vertical movements per shift dramatically. Safety nets are rigged below the active construction zones. Guards are posted to enforce safe working practices. Out of approximately 1,800 workers who contribute to the tower's construction over its 2 years, not one dies in a fall during the elevated work phases. In an era when major construction projects, bridges, tunnels, tall buildings, routinely kill dozens of men without any institutional concern, this is almost without precedent. It is the result of deliberate, considered, expensive choices Eiffel makes, when he could have simply accepted the industry standard of casualty and moved on. Almost, because 4 men do die. 3 die during the foundation work, in accidents during the compressed air excavations, in the mud and pressure below the water table. 1 dies from a fall during early steel erection, before the elevated safety systems are fully in place. Their names are not recorded on any plaque at the base of the tower. They are not mentioned in the official ceremony when the tower opens. They do not appear in the commemorative books published for the exposition. They are the invisible cost. The 4 names subtracted from the story of achievement so the story can remain clean. The tower receives more than 300 million visitors over its lifetime. Not one of them has ever been told those 4 men's names. Not one official ceremony has ever spoken them aloud. The construction continues upward through the summer and autumn of 1888. The second platform rises, then the structure tapers, narrows, rises again. The third level takes shape, and at the very top, the final iron sections are guided into place by workers who can see on a clear day, a circle of French countryside extending for 60 kilometers in every direction. On March 31st, 1889, the tricolor flag is raised from the summit of the completed tower by Eiffel himself, climbing the final stairs personally at the age of 56, above a city that spent 3 years trying to stop him. The tower stands 300 meters tall, 1,063 feet. It is the tallest structure ever built by human hands. It will hold that record for 41 years, longer than many of the petition signers will live. The Universal Exposition opens on May 6, 1889. The world arrives in Paris. Thomas Edison visits and signs the guest book, leaving a note of admiration. The Prince of Wales ascends to the first platform. Scientists, industrialists, heads of state, and ordinary people from dozens of countries buy tickets and climb and stare and come back and climb again. Nearly 2 million people visit the tower during the 6 months the exposition runs. The critics fall very quiet. Guy de Maupassant, who signed the petition against the tower, is said to have eaten lunch at the restaurant on the first platform nearly every day during the exposition. When asked why, given his public opposition, he is said to have replied that it was the only place in Paris from which he could not see the tower. He denied the story when directly confronted, but the story circulated for the rest of his life because it captured something the denial could not quite erase. The opposition had been wrong, knew it had been wrong, and had no graceful way to admit it. But the opponents are not finished, because they have something Eiffel does not yet have: time. The exposition closes in October of 1889. The crowds go home. The tower stands silent over a winter Paris, and now very quietly, the original contract terms begin to matter again. 20 years. The commercial license runs for 20 years. After that, the city owns the tower outright, and under the original agreement, the city can do with it whatever it chooses. Whatever it chooses. The opponents begin to wait. Throughout the 1890s, the opposition rebuilds its case. Architecture critics return to their platforms with renewed energy, arguing that the tower has proven its ugliness by remaining in place long past its welcome. City planners revive proposals to relocate it to the outskirts of Paris, where its industrial character would be more appropriate. In 1896, a prominent Parisian newspaper runs a reader poll asking directly, should the Eiffel Tower be demolished when the license expires in 1899? The results are close enough to worry Eiffel's supporters. 1899 approaches. The opponents count down. And then something unexpected happens. It starts with a wire. In 1898, a physicist named Eugène Ducretet successfully transmits a wireless telegraph signal from the Eiffel Tower to the Pantheon, a distance of 4 kilometers. The elevation of the tower, it turns out, dramatically extends the range of wireless transmission, not by a little, by a great deal. The tower is not merely 300 meters of iron. It is 300 meters of potential antenna, sitting at the geographic center of the most strategically important city in Europe. The French military notices immediately. A young army engineer named Gustave Eiffel begins working with Eiffel to develop military applications for the tower's transmitting capacity. By 1903, the experiments have produced results significant enough that the French army formally recommends to the government that the tower be retained as a permanent military radio installation. The demolition scheduled for 1899 is deferred, then deferred again. Then on January 1st, 1909, the very day the demolition order is finally issued as a legal formality, the permanent preservation order is signed simultaneously. The tower is saved permanently, officially, irrevocably, and the reason stated in the official documents is not beauty. It is not history. It is not culture or art or the legacy of French civilization. The reason is military telecommunications. A radio antenna. 6 million francs of iron and sweat and engineering genius, preserved because the army needed a tall thing in the right location. There is a lesson in that, somewhere, about how the things we eventually treasure are rarely saved for the reasons we eventually claim. But the tower's wartime role is not finished. It is only beginning. The First World War begins in the summer of 1914. Paris braces. The German advance in August of that year comes close enough to the city that the French government temporarily evacuates to Bordeaux. In the chaos of those first weeks, the Eiffel Tower radio installation operates around the clock, transmitting and receiving military communications across the Western Front. It intercepts enemy signals as often as it transmits friendly ones. The radio operators who work in the tower during the war years sit in cramped shifts above a blacked-out city. No lights below them, no sounds from the streets. The tower hums in the wind, and the war is in all directions, and the signals come in constantly. Coded, fragmented, urgent, and the operators decode what they can and pass it upward through the military intelligence chain. In 1915, something comes through the receiver that will eventually lead to one of the most contested executions of the entire war. The signal is connected to a woman known as Mata Hari. Her real name was Margaretha Zelle. She was born in the Netherlands in 1876. By 1905, she had reinvented herself entirely, a self-described Javanese princess and sacred dancer, performing across the capitals of Europe for audiences who paid handsomely to watch her. She was celebrated in Paris, in Berlin, in Vienna, in Rome. She moved between countries with an ease that in wartime began to look suspicious. French military intelligence had been watching her since 1915. The intercept from the Eiffel Tower that year, a German communication referring to an agent designated H21, is interpreted as a reference to Mata Hari herself. Whether the interpretation is correct has been argued ever since. She is arrested in Paris in February of 1917. She is tried by a closed military tribunal. Her defense lawyer is given inadequate time to prepare. The trial proceedings are classified. She maintains her innocence throughout. On October 15, 1917, she is taken before a firing squad at the Château de Vincennes at dawn. She is 41 years old. She refuses a blindfold. She refuses to be tied to the post. She looks at the soldiers and waits. The full decoded transcripts from the Eiffel Tower intercepts used in the case against her have never been publicly released. The relevant French military archive documents remain sealed. The debate over whether she was a genuine spy, a double agent, or a woman whose unconventional life made her a convenient wartime scapegoat has continued for over a century without resolution. What exactly did the tower hear in 1915? The complete answer remains unknown. The tower that Paris tried 3 times to destroy had become, within a single generation, a weapon of war, a judge, possibly an executioner, and it kept that secret better than any stone building could have. After the war, the tower enters a new era. The 1920s bring commercial radio broadcasting. The tower transmits to France and beyond, its signal reaching across the Channel into Britain and south across the Mediterranean. The tower becomes the voice of Paris as much as the face of it. By the time the 1930s arrive, it is no longer possible to imagine Paris without it. The opponents who remain alive by then no longer speak publicly about demolition. Some of them, in private letters discovered after their deaths, admit to having changed their minds. The tower, they concede, had become something they had not anticipated. Not a monument to an engineer's ambition, but a presence, a constant, the fixed point against which all other changes in the city are measured. But the tower's greatest test is still coming. On June 14, 1940, German forces march into Paris. The city does not burn. Hitler gives explicit orders for Paris to be preserved. He wants to walk through it as a conqueror, not as a general surveying ruins. His troops enter in formation down the Champs-Élysées. The swastika is raised over the Palais Bourbon. German officers take photographs in front of every landmark they have seen in books and films. They are tourists with rifles. They know exactly what they have taken, and they want proof. On June 23, 1940, Adolf Hitler himself arrives in Paris. He arrives before dawn. He takes a private tour, the Opera House, Napoleon's tomb, the Trocadero, and then he drives to the Champ de Mars to see the Eiffel Tower. He cannot go up. French resistance workers have cut the elevator cables overnight. The tower is functional at 6 in the morning and inoperable by the time the German convoy arrives. Hitler stands at the base of the structure that has come to represent France itself and looks up at a thing he cannot reach. His generals offer to have engineers repair the cables. He declines. He has his photograph taken with the tower behind him, the image his propaganda ministry will distribute across occupied Europe as proof of total dominance. But anyone who looks carefully at the photograph sees a man standing on the ground, looking up at something he did not climb. The cables are repaired the day Paris is liberated, August 25, 1944. By some accounts, restoring the tower's elevators is treated as a matter of urgent priority, before full electricity is restored to civilian neighborhoods, before many other essential services are resumed, because a city that cannot reach the top of its own tower is not yet a free city. And Paris, in August of 1944, intended to be freed before anything else. The tower has stood through all of it. The petitions and the demolition orders, the wars and the occupations, the cut cables and the raised flags, the secret intercepts and the executions, the reinventions, the repaintings, the 7 million visitors a year who arrive with their cameras and their children, and their 60-minute queues and their complete innocence of everything the tower has survived to greet them. It weighs approximately 10,100 tons. Its height changes by up to 15 centimeters between winter and summer. Thermal expansion causes it to grow in July and shrink in January, breathing slowly with the seasons in a rhythm no human construction was supposed to have. It is repainted every 7 years. 60 tons of paint, 25 painters, 18 months of work. The color adjusts slightly with each cycle. The current shade is called Eiffel Tower brown, a warm reddish tone selected not for romance but for practicality, because darker colors reveal structural defects more clearly during safety inspections. Even now, at over 130 years old, the tower is maintained not as a relic, but as a living structure. Its iron bones are inspected constantly. Its paint is stripped and reapplied with the same care that a surgeon gives to a patient who has no plans to die. Think about that for a moment. The structure that Paris issued a demolition order for in 1909 is currently maintained with greater care and more financial investment than most buildings constructed in the past decade. The thing they tried to tear down has outlasted the political systems, the institutions, and the philosophical frameworks of everyone who wanted it gone. Gustave Eiffel died on December 27, 1923, at the age of 91 in his home in Paris. Not at the top of his tower, but within sight of it. He had lived long enough to see the demolition order reversed, long enough to see the tower declared a permanent fixture of the city, long enough to watch the men who signed the petition grow old in the shadow of the thing they could not stop. He never said he told them so. That was not his way. He was an engineer. Engineers do not win arguments by speaking. They win arguments by building. And the tower speaks for itself, every day, for over a century, in every language, to every person who stands beneath it for the first time and looks up and feels, without entirely knowing why, that they are in the presence of something that refused. That refused the petition, refused the legal challenges, refused the demolition order, refused the occupation, refused to be merely temporary, refused above all to be what the people who feared it said it was. Some things are not meant to come down. Some things, no matter how many people want them gone, no matter how official the order, no matter how righteous the opposition, simply refuse. And the ones that survive long enough eventually stop being the thing people argued about and become the thing people can no longer imagine the world without. Not a blot on the soul of France. The soul of France. That is the real story of the Eiffel Tower. Not the triumph, the survival.